And Congressman Donald is here as my guest. Welcome. Thanks for doing this.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Let's start with this national debate over gun violence, a very serious issue. We saw those moving hearings. We showed some of that at the top of the show tonight. When you look at something that doesn't necessarily take guns out of circulation, but might help make sure the wrong, dangerous people don't get them, like background checks. You voted against background checks last year. Why not have some sort of check on who can get guns if that might save lives?
Well, a couple things. Number one, I think the misconception is we already have a very large and wide background check system in the United States. If you look at the people that acquired these guns before these tragedies, they actually went through the FBI background check system. And so that's one of the things that we have to make sure that's clear. The agenda from the Democrats, the policy position from them is to go to this quote unquote universal background check system, which actually has private people individually, if I'm selling to you or you're selling to your sister or whoever, that they have to go through a federal background check system in an intrastate transaction. That's the only addition. And so the reality is it's an intrastate transaction. There's no real ability for an individual to go to the FBI to get that background check done. So are we going to criminalize citizens who pass a gun from one citizen to another? That typically is a transaction that does not take place. And if you look at these mass shootings that have occurred, the perpetrators typically go get their firearms either through a federally firearms dealer and pass the background check, or like in the case of Sandy Hook, that shooter killed his mother and took her guns.
Well, when you walk through it that way, Congressman, isn't that what proponents are saying, that if it is this easy to get a gun under the current system, that's why you have to strengthen it? I mean, if people are getting murder weapons from, as you say, intrastate, why wouldn't you want to help make sure the wrong people, criminals, et cetera, don't get them?
But see, that's the key thing there. If you look at the data, that's actually not how these perpetrators are getting their guns. Straw purchases are actually banned under federal law. That is illegal. You're not allowed to go buy a firearm and pass it to another individual. That's illegal. Again, if you look at the mass shooting events that have occurred, especially the ones in our schools, the perpetrators went through the federal firearms background check system. Now, if you want to talk about things like red flag laws, New York State has a red flag law. But the shooter in New York, that heinous person, there were actually flags that were there, but nobody ever reported on that person. And so these things are tragic to our country, but we have to look at the facts.
Let me jump in. I appreciate, and we're talking policy, and there's more than one way to look at it, so I appreciate us getting into it because that's an important issue. But we could put on the screen, I mean, the flag laws, when you were in Florida, you voted against the red flag law. You're mentioning red flag laws don't stop all shootings. I'll say to you, Congressman, fact check, true. There has not been policies that we've seen that stop everything. But 20 states that do require the expanded background checks, I'll put this on the screen, you said let's deal in facts, have these background checks. They've been ruled constitutional. They've been ruled to be effective. And so I guess the question becomes, and then I want to move on to one other topic while I have you, but given that it can work sometimes, let's stipulate that you said sometimes it doesn't work, true. But if it can work sometimes, why not try it? I mean, help us balance that against these kids who are getting murdered if it does work sometimes.
Well, here's the difference. If you're talking about a state that has decided to do expanded checks, that's an intrastate transaction that is directly within the confines of state powers and state law. But the federal government does not have the ability to regulate intrastate transactions. That's
okay,
actually,
but you voted.
But that's a power that the state, that the
but
federal
you
government
voted
does
against
not
it
have.
at the state. We'll put it back on the screen. I think we have it. You voted against it at the state level. How about that?
Actually, in Florida, there was not a provision in the school safety law with respect to intrastate background checks. What it was about was red flag laws, risk protection orders, and raising the age from 18 to 21. There are serious Fifth Amendment constitutional issues with red flag laws because essentially you will be giving your property can be taken from you by a court of law without you being able to defend yourself in said court of law. Those are the constitutional issues that exist with red flag laws.
And I understand that concern. I mean, Justice Scalia, who went farther than anyone on the federal level of backing an individual right to bear arms, he said those rights, even in doing so, are not without limitation. not a right to keep and carry a weapon whatsoever in any manner for whatever purpose. So I just want to get that in there on the law, but I appreciate the back and forth. Turning to these hearings tomorrow night, which, as you know, are a big deal. There was this insurrection, this violent attack on the Capitol by Trump fans. I want to play just a little bit of what we saw that day as we go into these hearings. Here's what it looked like. Was it wrong for those Trump fans to do all that? Was it an insurrection? And knowing what we know now, if the purpose is to go forward, should Trump and those other people who sent them down to the Capitol have acted differently?
Well, first things first, I was on the floor that day. It was a tragedy for the nation. Nobody is allowed to breach a federal building. And I mean nobody. Doesn't matter what side of politics you're on. And I've been crystal clear on that from day one, from that very day. Number two, and more importantly, is this. One of the things that this January 6th committee, whether they are found it out or they've leaked it to the media, I don't know. But we found out in the Oversight Committee was that Donald Trump authorized 10,000 National Guard troops to be at the Capitol on January 6th. He authorized those troops on January 4th. The real question is, what did Nancy Pelosi know about these troops? And what did Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C., do with the National Guard troops that were in D.C. on the 6th? I can tell you right now, they weren't at the Capitol. That's still a question that House Republicans have with respect to the January 6th investigation.
Was it an insurrection?
Was it an insurrection? No, because look, the reality is people came into the Capitol. They tried to stop an official proceeding. We continued our business 4 hours later that day, and then this peaceful transition of power continued. I think if you're going to go towards the level of insurrection or sedition, that's actually a finding the Department of Justice needs to have through a thorough investigation. What I see coming from the January 6th committee just seems to be more politics, more leaking, because to be frank, the Democrat agenda has failed Americans all across the country, and they know it.
Well, the sedition part, as you say, that is federal law. We could put that up. The leaders that Donald Trump name-checked, including the Proud Boys, are currently awaiting trial. They're legally presumed innocent. But that's the conspiracy to overthrow the government. There's a sedition set of trials there, and there is evidence on that. As for the insurrection, I mean, Mitch McConnell himself declared an insurrection that night. Other people that I know are leaders in your party have done so. And so before I lose you, because it feels like this has moved, and I appreciate you coming on the show to talk about it. It feels like the party has sort of changed its position. Here's what we were hearing around the 6th about how bad this was.
Tension is too high. The country is too crazy. I do not want to look back and think we caused something or we missed something and someone got hurt.
This is hurting all of us. He is destroying his legacy, Laura Ingraham wrote. He's got to condemn this ASAP, Donald Trump Jr. texted.
Chaos, anarchy. The violence today was wrong and un-American.
We will not be kept out of this chamber by thugs, mobs, or threats.
So, Congressman, I don't mean to make the last question potentially the hardest, but really when it's all out in the open like that, who do you agree with? Do you agree with McConnell and Rand Paul and some of those Fox people and the president's son, what they said then? Or do you agree with them now? Because you said let's deal in facts. They've obviously completely reversed themselves.
Listen, with the audio you just played, everybody condemned the violence on that day when it happened, and we still condemn it today. Like I said, you are not allowed to breach a federal building. If you do, you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Many people are being prosecuted. There are some questions about the detainees and their constitutional rights with respect to speedy trial, but the reality is that it was heinous for our country and it should never be tolerated. The only thing I would say is that if we're going to discuss the facts surrounding January 6th, let's discuss them all, including what happened to the National Guard troops that were authorized by President Trump on January 4th.
And now our viewers have had the benefit of hearing your views in the back and forth, so we appreciate that. Congressman Donalds, your first time on the beat. I hope you'll come back.
Oh, anytime. It was fun.